We can create media for people to consume that's an alternate version of their world that actually reflects their world in a way that dominant media can't. But the vast fire hose of information that's coming at Americans comes from 11 companies. That's right. That number will go down in the next decade. It'll be a smaller, more concentrated number of content providers. They'll have different faces, they'll have different corporate names behind them, but it'll be like, 6 owners rather than 11. That's a problem. There's no way that the economics of that type of media system actually can encompass and describe the everyday lives of Americans. There's just no way it'll ever happen. So you've got to find other types of systems to be able to support a media that is not describing a world that's alien to them and that actually reflects their culture and their lived historical practices.
Hi, my name is Pat Holt, and I work here at CAT TV. I call it my work. I'm retired, so I don't really work, but it's kind of like a job. Keeps me from becoming a vegetable in my older age. I grew up in Pleasant Valley, New York. Then I went in the Marine Corps. Of course, none of that has anything to do with film or video. And then after that, I worked at IBM. IBM gave me, as part of my retirement, $2,500 to use for classes within the first year. So I took classes in photography. Then I started a photography business. I got involved with CAT because I wanted to make videos of things, and I didn't have the equipment at home to do that. I signed up and I used their cameras, and they trained me. And I started out going to the wildlife preserve and filming migrating birds. The white pelicans come through Columbia on their way from the north to the south. And so I started out with that kind of thing. And then from there I moved on to people and activities that people did. Different music shows, and with the consent of the people playing the music, I filmed their music events and put that on CAT. And then just went on from there. Wednesday I filmed a rally. The majority of 2017 has been rallies and demonstrations and protests and marches that I've done films of. And we have plenty of those in Columbia. And then they can be on CAT.
CAT, Columbia Access Television, is a small nonprofit here in Columbia, Missouri. We were formed in 2004 by a group of folks that saw the need for the community to have a voice in our area. They saw a pathway to fund that as well, and brought that to the city council, and I guess essentially won that fight, and showed the city council where they could be receiving additional funding from the cable companies, and then to be able to use that money to provide the community an outlet that we have here.
Columbia Access Television is all-inclusive. Anybody and everybody is welcome.
It's an awesome place. There's so many amazing people that come in here every day and share their voice and their talents and their opinions.
They're more than happy to teach you a skill. If you have a story to tell, it's a great place to learn how to tell it well, how to be media literate, to be able to use the tools necessary to be able to tell your story to a larger audience. All of that is available to you here.
What's unique about Columbia Access Television and community media in general is the fact that you have the productions of citizen journalists speaking their opinions and voicing things about news that may not be covered in your average local newscast or in your paper or things in general.
It's a place to learn about the community you live in. The people who are creating the stories live next door to you, or live down the street, or they have issues that you might have that you can relate to.
These are people who truly search out community events and community issues that are dedicated to speaking out and making sure things are right with local governments, with certain activities that are going on in the community.
A lot of people might be saying, I've got this problem, I think I'm the only one who has it. It's like, oh, wow, there's somebody else here who's got the same problem I do. Maybe we can put our heads together and come up with a solution for it.
The coverage is very organic, it's grassroots, and it's information that people might want to know about but can't get anywhere else.
To help people just learn and meet new folks and just become, just have a sense of community within that community.
Yeah, I think a friend, got me hooked, and now I'm on the board of directors. Yeah, I think she told me about it because, I wanted to do my own TV show, and we were just sharing ideas back and forth, and I think she encouraged me to go into the basement of Stevens College. It was just this tiny little area. They only had a handful of editing computers, and
It's grown and it's shrunk and it's grown and shrunk, I think. And right now it's hard to say where we are right now. And so it feels like we're in one of those growing spaces at this moment when, physically speaking, we're pretty small still.
Community media is an entity that covers and archives and explores what's going on in a specific local community. It's local news, it's local events.
I define community media as local conversations and local dialogue. And that may take, in terms of technology, different forms.
For me, community media is defined by accessibility. Community media should be exactly that, media produced by the community itself. I think community media necessarily has a geographic component to it. We're not talking about communities of interest or your Facebook community. We're talking about the community and where you live, and the community where you live having access to the means of production of media.
So many of the media outlets that we have now are covering national events, and no one's really doing local events. And that's what community media does, is that it brings that localism directly to residents.
And really the value of going in depth into an issue and bringing in experts from different paths and having a discussion, that I think we can do. And I think that is really needed. News in some ways it can be very unsatisfying because a lot of times it's just the top line, this happened, and you don't have the depth to understand why that's important.
I think it's probably more difficult to define now than it was 24 years ago when I started in this field, in that technology drives where people communicate.
It's a messy space because you have more than one medium. Each of the traditions is going to be different. But I think it's extremely important for us to think about multiple traditions that have existed, at least here in the States. There's actually different forms of community media in other countries too.
24 years ago, it would be local cable television stations. That's the community media. And then it probably has evolved into things like email and evolved into things like text messaging now, and now social media.
If you take that definition wide enough, you could actually probably look at some of the traditions of independent publishing in America, like independent newspapers, community-based newspapers, community journalism. Those are community media forms. So I think I have a pretty expansive view.
Be it, be it YouTube videos, be it a community newsletter, be it radio or television or cable television, that members of the community, members of the public have access to this technology and are able to tell their stories and have their voices heard.
There is no intermediary. There is no editorial board saying this can get on or this cannot get on.
It's more than just, having someone sit down in front of a screen and watch it and absorb whatever programming is coming on the screen. It gives you the opportunity to actually get the tools and learn to use those tools to present your own opinions, your own talents for others to see.
One day I interviewed Chris Murtis, who's a long-standing editor at The Star, and I had known Chris back from when he first came and I was on the city council. I was on the city council for 18 years, by the way. Frankly, I was getting burned out doing city talk by myself. So I said, Chris, our interview went really well. Why don't we team up as co-host and do a show like this? So we did that, and from about 2007 until now, Chris and I have been doing Talk of the Town.
The more light you shed on issues and on government itself, the more people are going to find out about it, the more they're going to learn about it, and the more they're going to be critical users of your government and know what's going on.
Well, the Sun Prairie Media Center is a really vital resource for the growing city of Sun Prairie. We have 2 TV channels here. One TV channel is very much what I think most people would think of when they think of local public access channels. That is our K-Sun channel, and that is where you'll find the city meetings, the high school basketball, all the community programming, high school football, things of that nature. And then we have a really unique channel called Kids 4. And Kids 4 is the channel where all of our programming is aired that our kids in our Kids 4 program produce.
On Kids 4, everything is made for and by kids, all the kids in our programs, and so they make videos and we upload them to the channel, and everything is by them and for them.
Kids 4 was started in 1978, and it was formed by a group of people in town that when the cable company was coming into town, they said, well, we want a couple of local channels and we want one specific to be for kids. So they petitioned and got it allocated specific for kids. Really, it is intended to be a media literacy program where kids are learning how to tell their story through media. But at the core of it, they're also learning how to work in groups, how to be creative, how to be responsible, how to be nice to one another, and things like that.
I think they get an education on both the technical part of the production and filming, and as well as how it's used in society today.
Because the more kids find out about media and the more they learn about the behind-the-scenes stuff, the more they're going to be able to critically watch TV and even ads and break them down and say, well, that just isn't real, or it's not, the better critics they are of media, or the better critical watchers they are of media, the better media consumers they're going to be in the future. That's good for voting. That's good for being an informed citizen. And it's good for personal development. My daughter actually went through the Kids 4 program. She had to come out of her shell to participate in that program because you've got to come up with ideas, you've got to shoot it, or be part of it, or the director, and you've got to be able to use those kids or cajole those kids to do what you want to do.
The Kids 4 program is something that happens after school, 4 days a week, and kids come in through the local area schools. We have about 60 kids right now, and they work in crews of about 8 to 10, and they do everything themselves. They do the lighting, the sound, the acting, the directing, the producing, the script writing, and all of the programming that they produce, obviously with staff supervision, is aired on our Kids 4 channel. And we also have a radio station here, the community radio station 103.5 FM, The Sun, which went on the air in the summer of 2015. So it's about 2 years old.
I think they're very serious about thinking that they're important to the life of Sun Prairie. And they build relationships with institutions of various types in their community. And that's the reason why they got a radio station. But they've expanded their footprint because it's meaningful for Sun Prairie, which is a small town outside of Madison, and Sun Prairie wants to still have an identity, and it still thinks that it has information needs that are separate from the rest of the Madison community there.
So I think there are three threats that are facing today. One is the question of money, one is the question of politics, and one is the question of technology. Starting with money, we are seeing less and less resources being devoted to community media. And we're seeing community media organizations really having to struggle and hustle for every dollar and dime they get, be it from philanthropic organizations, which have tended now to fund journalism rather than community media. On the public access television side, we've got this issue of statewide franchising, which means that they're not getting as much money from the cable company anymore, and we're seeing less public donations as well. Again, all under this guise of, well, we've got YouTube, so why do we need this other stuff?
Many of them are dependent upon one granting agency, either cable revenue directly from the cable company, or a grant that comes in an appropriation or a contract with a local government. That's either year to year or maybe it's multi-year. But a lot of places only have one source of revenue, and that's not a tenable situation long term.
The franchise fee is the service providers rent to use the public's right of way. It's not a tax. I don't care what anybody says, it's not a tax, because if it's a tax, everybody pays it. And the only people who pay for it are the video service providers, and if they pass it on to the consumers, well, if you've got cable, then part of your money goes toward that. If you don't have cable, you don't pay a dime for it.
And the franchise fee is typically 5% of the gross revenues that the cable company gets from their video revenue. But then in addition, a city could request a PEG fee, which stands for Public Education and Government Access. The PEG fee is dedicated to community television, and it cannot be used for other purposes. So that's wonderful, because the franchise fee, because it goes into the general fund, it can be used for fire trucks. The PEG fee could only be used for community television. So when that disappeared in Wisconsin, that was a great loss, because we lost dedicated funding. And now every year we have to go up against very basic city services like public works and fire and police to also fund community television.
And I would say that the biggest problem is state franchising, because that generally does not provide for money for PEG. And therefore, if you want to get money, you almost have to get it from the local government, but it comes out of their general funds. And a problem we've had in more recent years has been screws have been put on the local governments, taking away money for other purposes. There's more of a temptation or need to dip into this money.
Senate Bill 284 came down in 2007, and that basically allowed video service providers to bypass individual negotiations with municipalities. They could go straight to the state to get a video franchising agreement. And they would provide, whether they wanted, they could provide portions of a city if they wanted to. They didn't have to cover the entire city, which used to be required before. So they could, in effect, cherry pick what locations they want to provide service.
Statewide franchising is this idea that instead of every municipality giving permission for a cable company to, kind of lay wires in the streets, right? That all of that power is being moved up to the state level. Now, companies like Comcast and AT&T are saying, well, this is more beneficial. It's more pragmatic because they don't have to negotiate with every single community. Now they can just negotiate with the state. That has been particularly detrimental to what's called public educational and government access television.
I think the thing that's curious is that the wave that happened in 2005 was bad, particularly in the AT&T states. If you did an analysis of bills that Verizon put forward, they were probably not as bad as the AT&T states were. The AT&T states footprint being places like Texas, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, and California. Illinois probably is the least destructive of the AT&T legislation that occurred because of the lobbying effort that occurred by local governments and by community TV operations in the state.
So the more states that have moved to a statewide franchising kind of system or regime rather than a local franchising regime have tended to defund their public access stations. And we saw this massively happen in Texas, where community access stations in Austin and Houston went off the air or were decimated because they lost all of their money. They lost their dedicated funding stream.
Several large public access stations were dependent on PEG fees. So we have lost Milwaukee's public access station. We have lost Madison's public access station. They hang on with a few volunteers. We have lost West Alice's public access station, which was a model for the nation. They were wonderful. Eau Claire's public access has been severely damaged.
In a place like San Francisco, it's been devastating. The city of San Francisco, after the state law passed, changed its contract to support only $150,000 of activity, which, in a city the size of San Francisco, I think the organization prior to the franchising bill probably got more than $1 million a year in support.
And one of the things that we're dealing with right now is that in our state law, it just says that the cable company must transmit the access channel. It doesn't say with what quality or that it has to keep up with technology. So we are dealing in Wisconsin with modulators that are appropriate for the cable system, but are so ancient you can hardly find them on secondhand equipment sites. And I'm starting to get messages from our members. My modulator is falling apart, what can we do? Because it's our responsibility to provide that equipment, not the cable companies, under our law. So we have that problem. We have the problem that all of our stations are now creating programming in HD, but the largest cable operator, Spectrum Charter, refuses to broadcast us in HD. All of our channels are SD. So when you look on the channel guide, switch from channel to channel, our channels look crappy, and so it discourages viewership. The other thing is that the cable company doesn't have to provide an electronic program guide for us, where every viewer goes to the electronic program guide to see what's on. Our channel may be listed, but our programming is not. So our programs can't be recorded. You can't find out what's on. All of those things would be probably remedied if we had had a local agreement. But because it's state, we actually have to pass a law, through this state legislature to remedy those things, because cable company sees that they have the advantage here and they're not doing anything about it.
The short story goes like this: in states that eliminated PEG fees or severely restricted the power of local governments to negotiate deals to be able to support community expression, you either see diminishing community expression, or you see the only operations that are thriving are G channels, because the local government has a harder and harder time justifying spending money on resources for external communication or non-governmental communication.
CAT entered into a contract with the city to receive $200,000 a year for 5 years. When that contract expired, it coincided with a new city manager, and he took a look at the overall situation from a fiscal standpoint and decided not to renew that contract nor offer us another contract. At that point, we were zeroed out in the city's budget from $200,000 the year before. We went to City Council and we fought and were able to get $100,000 that year. We went through the same rigmarole, and I think we were at $50,000 for the next 2 years.
This is a city whose police department's 30% understaffed, whose fire department's 25% understaffed. We're not fixing our roads in a timely fashion. And so a decision to fund CATV $50,000 is $50,000 that we are not using for community policing. It's that simple. But knowing that, I'm going to make a motion, I may not have a second, to amend the amendment sheet to transfer $50,000 from CATV to community policing. Is there a second? The motion dies for lack of a second. And that shortens the meeting substantially.
So I'm not withdrawing this one. I firmly believe that we should not reduce the funding that goes to CAT TV any further. It was at $200,000 a year for 5 years under a contract. There was logic behind that contract. The city receives about $600,000 a year in franchise fees from the cable companies.
We just had our citizen survey, and the two things are roads and police, and I think that's where we should focus all of our extra spending on, is roads and police. And so I can't support this amendment going forward because I think we should abide by our original agreement.
I don't ever recall any kind of vote. I think it was certain individual council people's opinions that it should go down to zero, but I don't recall any vote that the council ever took to say that we all, or a majority of us wanted to do that.
It's my recollection in this whole thing that there was a step-down procedure that we agreed to, and we went from $200,000 to $100,000 to $50,000 then, and that was
we took it year
the
by
assumption.
year.
That's right, and there may have been some discussion about. There was at one time some discussion about not funding it at all or funding it at much higher levels. I don't think that was ever. The only thing that was ever voted on really was the step down to the $50,000 level to each year. It's my recollection.
That's my recollection.
I want to give them the security and the predictability they need, that we're not having this fight every year.
But for FY17, it's currently pegged at $35,000 from council reserves.
Any changes, suggestions to that? All those in favor of the CAT TV funding as presented indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed? Seeing none.
We are now receiving $35,000 a year. I guess maybe just 4 years after the $200,000, or 5 years after that contract has expired.
And that's hard. It's very, very hard. And it's, I think, part of the difficult conversation that's happening in many communities is like the Columbia conversation you're talking about. It's like, what do you do with $35,000 a year? You can barely, you can barely keep the doors open for a community center for that, I would imagine.
We have experienced quite a bit of staffing reduction. In 2014, we had 4 full-time employees and a part-time employee. And currently, as we round out 2017 and enter 2018, we have 1 full-time employee and have been in that situation for about a year.
And that has dramatically changed how we can do what we do.
We simply don't have the same number of hands and bodies available to provide the same amount of assistance that we once were.
The less funding local governments get, the less funding they have to give to community media. I think community media is something they would like to support, but if they don't have money for filling potholes or getting that fire truck they need, they're not going to be able to fund community media either.
I feel like membership has been very consistent with tons of creative people coming through.
But yeah, money is the key. I think anyone would tell you that, especially nonprofits. And finding funding for that is, I think, going to become increasingly difficult, I think, for public access television. Maybe television is going to go away. I don't understand, where we are with actual television versus, internet content.
And this intersects with technology, where I think the argument now is, well, now that we have YouTube, now that we have social media, why do we need kind of organized community media anymore? Why do we need community media centers or community media hubs or radio stations or public access television stations? Like, why do we need any of this now that we've got this thing called the internet? And that's the argument for why we're seeing less resources, kind of both financial resources, material resources being devoted to community media.
I think there's an argument to be made that the media systems that are being built right now are not meant for individual producers, even though we say that, the internet has changed everything. And we say that, personal electronics has made everyone a producer. And it's all well and good, but not everyone is a distributor. And not everyone packages content. And not everyone can make money on content. Yes, someone could become a YouTube star today, but is that actually going to help a community with its information needs? Will it? Will it actually help a community understand itself? Will it actually help a community know its history, know the history of newcomers who are making their place as citizens in the community? I don't think it will necessarily. Those are all sort of like vital functions that civic media, civic-based media can do. And increasingly, we're the only people doing that game.
To me, it's twofold. You have to increase awareness and funding for Columbia Access Television, as well as increase the viewability from the general public.
Please be seated. Good morning. I'm Tom Hebel. I'm a municipal judge for the city of Sun Prairie.
On the politics side, community media has always had a rough road battling policymakers. I don't think policymakers, there was a brief moment in the late 1970s where the Federal Communications Commission understood the value of community media. But since then, the United States has really struggled to have any sort of community media policy framework. And there hasn't been a dedicated political or policy response. We've seen pockets of it. There was something called the Community Broadcasting Act. There was something called the Community Media Preservation Act, that attempts have been made, but those have been few and far between. And now at least the regulator, the Federal Communications Commission, this particular iteration of the FCC has been particularly hostile to anything that kind of reeks of public intervention. So this is going to be a tough road ahead politically, technologically, and economically, I think, for community media.
The positive, I would tell you, is that there are many traditions of community media practice that are resilient and that are community-based and that can thrive. I think it's going to be extremely important for organizations to be thinking about outreach and audience and partnerships that they can be making to be able to ensure that they have worth in the eyes of people and the minds of people in their community. Extremely important.
Because the largest cable company in Wisconsin, Charter Spectrum, has treated access fairly poorly, like not having us on the program guide, not showing us an HD. A lot of our stations have really switched their focus already to the web. And I think a lot of stations are seeing the difference in audiences there. One of the big ones I've noticed, especially as, because I see programs coming through our Media Fest, is that the programs have gotten shorter, and they're editing them for the shorter attention span of the web viewer. So that's one thing they're doing. They're beefing up their Facebook pages a lot, and a lot of them are doing live streaming. A lot of them are just doing links to maybe YouTube videos. I think in a lot of ways, the social media and the internet has been a real boon for access, because all of those things are so much more interactive and so much easier to get to. Whereas with a cable channel, it's in an order and no one knows what the schedule is because there's no electronic program guide, schedule. So this way we can drive viewers to our cable channel with all of those interactive means, and so it's been really beneficial.
In Columbia, Missouri, we have this great, unique film festival called True False, and it's a documentary film festival about everyday life and different aspects of life and all around the world. And it has grown tremendously to this 3-day, 4-day now event that the entire city supports, and a lot of people go out and view a lot of these documentaries, talk to the directors, and answer Q&As or ask questions for the Q&As, and it's really unique to Columbia. What CAT has done is tied themselves to them and supported them with some of the filming of the actual event for promotional purposes, but filming directors' talks and supporting local documentaries that are made during the film festival. And so that's how they get their name out there. And with tying themselves to such a big event, it's great to see, the people who support the film festival tend to support CAT as well.
And having the radio station has really revolutionized the Media Center. It's really given it a huge shot in the arm. It's basically tripled our volunteer hours. It's doubled the number of volunteers that we're working with. It's just gotten us so much more activity around here, which we love. I mean, my favorite part of the job, and I think everybody's favorite part of the job, is working with volunteers and helping them to get their creativity out in whatever medium or form they want to get it out in. The other thing about having the radio station that's really changed the Media Center is we now are in the community a lot more. We're going to all the events and the festivals and the school things and the Optimist Club Pancake Breakfast and this and that, and we're doing live broadcasts at all these events, and so it's just given us a real pipeline into the community that I think didn't exist before. So it's been really wonderful.
Here at the Sun Prairie Media Center, I'm a volunteer. Currently, I'm doing 12 radio programs that I basically do all the programming for. I came up with the ideas for the programs, and I do them at different times during my week. A lot of them are done on my lunch hour during my day from my full-time job, and then I do some after work. But yeah, I love radio, and it's my way of sharing my passion for music with the community, but also to connect with the community in some way and to give back to it. Good Wednesday afternoon. You are listening to 103.5 FM, WLSP-LP, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Welcome to SON Archaeology. I'm your host, Mark Gonwa. Today, a subject that I think most people have a love-hate relationship with, that being snow.
When I started here, we were sort of the opinion that if a volunteer or a community member or a citizen didn't ask us to cover something, we might not cover that event or that groundbreaking or that ribbon cutting or whatever the case may be. I've taken the stance that it is part of our job to know what's going on in Sun Prairie, and if there's something going on, that we should go out and try to cover that event.
Anytime you go to an event in the community, you see us out there. I think that's really cool. I love how we reach out and just help get the word out for small events, people that are doing, something that helps the community. We use our platform to help reach more viewers and ears.
So that provides an alternate resource to more largely broadcast programs that are more, I guess, considered mainstream.
We're much more into being proactive in what we are putting on our channel instead of just being reactive.
Currently, I'm working in Carroll County, Maryland, and essentially it's almost in the heart of Maryland, north of DC and west of Baltimore. It's a rural county, about 300,000, and it's a media desert for the most part. There is one radio station, and it has a limited license, and there is a paper that is now owned by the Baltimore Sun, and so the coverage in the paper is probably just about as much about national and regional news as it is about local news. And that's about it. Beyond that, you're looking for local content. The local community media center, which I serve as the executive director, is the source for local information and active in terms of creating content and programming. So the Community Media Center is recognized by most of the organizations as the place to go and try and get coverage. So we'll get phone calls and requests, and so we try to provide a range of services. We can't meet all of the demands that are out there and available. So people could just be as simple as they want their calendar of events. So we used our website essentially to curate events so that people could find a place that they would know if they're looking for something to do in Carroll County, that they could find a calendar of events on our website. We also put that on our channel as a sort of entry level for someone to get involved.
When I came on board 17 years ago in Fall River, we called ourselves Fall River Public Access. And then we knew we were a television station. Then we changed our name to Fall River Community Television. And then just 4 years ago, we decided to change our name once again to Fall River Community Media, media being, of course, a broader term in terms of where people get their information and how we communicate. So that takes into account our website, our social media presence now, of course. So we look ourselves more as a media organization, which allows for growth as well, to emerging technologies and communication outlets in the future.
It's obvious we're going to have to go to the internet, and we've made that leap in having a YouTube channel that people can watch, and we're streaming on the internet as well as being on cable. We don't know what the future of the internet's going to be, but we have to change with it.
So one of the pilot projects that we're currently involved with is utilizing augmented reality. The current library sits in Westminster on Main Street on the location of what had been a Catholic church. And so we are essentially collecting various digital assets and learning how to make those available in augmented reality. So someone on that site could essentially interpret history by holding up their phone or their tablet, and when the camera sees the library, they will superimpose images of the church where the church had been previously. So essentially it's geolocated services.
we have to be savvy as to where our local audience is, right? And in our community, a lot of our people are on Facebook. And we have increased our use of Facebook in terms of reaching out to them, not only informing them about what we're doing as a station, which we do all the time, but also providing content. We just finished a local election in Fall River this November. And we spent a lot of our time in producing candidate forums and candidate debates, which we aired live on our cable television channel, streamed live on our website, but we took the extra step of streaming it live on Facebook.
And so we use all of those tools together to give our viewers as many options as possible to watch the information that we're sending out.
One of the things that I feel very strongly about is the local nature of community television and the fact that we have a brick and mortar building in a city for people to use to come and do video. Same thing with a community media website. It's one place where all community-related videos are housed, or a Facebook page. So the idea of using YouTube, you can't just use YouTube alone. You really have to make that as just a direction you can go in once you get to the homepage of your community media website. So it's a tool, it's not an end. It's not good enough to just have a YouTube site because no one's going to find it. And what you want to do is encourage people to see everything that's going on in the community.
Well, in the case of Elk Grove Village, I have, of course, I do live streaming of my channel. I also have a video on demand site. So everything that we produce, you can go to a website and watch it anytime you want. We also have a Roku channel, which does the same thing. If you have a Roku set-top box, you can watch our live stream on it. You can watch our on-demand programming on it.
It's not so much about the tools, because while the tools 20 or 30 years ago might have been porta-packs and video edit systems and cable television channels, it's really about how to help people develop their storytelling skills, how to understand how to communicate more effectively, how to bring community together to try and celebrate and share that information more effectively.
Some years ago, the mayor of Columbia got a very large grant for about, I believe it was around $6 million, to build bicycle paths into the University of Missouri from the surrounding parts of town, and also from the Katy Trail that goes from Kansas City to St. Louis. And it's just about finished, but there's an area of about 33 acres that it's called It's Our Wild Nature. And the people that are involved with that want to keep that as a nature, not putting a cement bike path through it, because all of these bike paths are cement. When they build a 10-foot wide bike path, they make a space about 40 feet wide so that they can get all the equipment in. So I got involved with them and made some nature videos that we showed at the city hall, and they haven't gotten it yet. So we're hoping that they don't get it because, well, it's just not a good idea. The videos are available for people to look at on YouTube, and it's really relaxing to watch the scenery and the green and the music. It's a very relaxing thing. And I did all that with Columbia Access Television. We also made, for that same group, we also made a video where we demonstrated how some of the trails that are existing now are not really ADA compliant. We went with a lady with a wheelchair and another lady with a walker,
and the lady with the wheelchair had to turn back. The sidewalk that was there had gaps. And then when she arrived, she had to, like, it was a roll over rocks in her manual wheelchair to get to the trail. And then when they got to the trail, it was really pretty steep. And we made a video to show that. And it has been fixed. The entrance to the trail has been fixed.
I went to one of my doctors, and first time I'd seen this doctor, and we got to talking, and it was, I know you from somewhere, I know that face, that beard, what do I know you? And I was like, I know, we're trying to sort it out, and it came down to, you review movies, I've seen your show.
Oftentimes, I'll run into people outside that are like, oh, dude, I saw that interview, with that burlesque dancer. That was so funny.
So it's fun when someone's, just says, hey, I watch your stuff. Like, cool, we're not just, yelling into the darkness. There's people out there.
The community media center itself, again, it's a place where people can congregate. And somebody might be in headphones editing something over here, and someone would be over here working on something else. We had a group of church ladies who'd come in. They'd come in from a apostolic church group, and they'd be editing some of their programs. And they'd be sitting next to some devout anarchists who were editing whatever stories that they were doing, the videos they were working on. And they'd be sitting next to each other, and they'd take off their headphones, and they'd talk to each other about what's the best way to what's the best way to edit this? How can I get the audio to work, to make this thing do better? Completely divergent, stories that they're telling, but they still have something in common, is that they're both trying to learn how to tell their story better. And so they work together on that, even if the storylines are completely different. They have that in common, which also is what the media centers can provide.
We're all trying to get this, we all have the same mission. We're trying to get information out to people, and some people want to read it in the paper, some people want to listen to it on the radio, and some people want to see it on TV. So
definitely very important. It's like a platform, for the community, the public voice.
Today I filmed a speech for a local candidate for Congress, and I used my own camera and my own recorder, but I don't have a mic that you hook on to people like this. So I borrowed one of those from Columbia Access Television, and I did not remember how to use it right, so I wasn't able to use it. But when I came back, I showed it to Sean, and he explained to me what settings I was supposed to use, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm happy that Sean is here to help me.
So I have a lot of options to play with. And it's because of the support that the community has given us to present this kind of programming to people.
We're a hyper-local entity. Anything happening on Sun Prairie that we can get to, we think is important enough to cover.
Community media may lack some finesse or some professionalism. City council meetings may go on endlessly, but what we are at our core is local, and anybody can come and tell their stories at a local media center, and that is of such value today.
The one word that I always describe Sun Prairie Media Center with is just family. I very quickly felt like I was welcomed in here.
It's my happy place, and I, when I'm here, I just, I want to give as much as I can, back to the media center and then in turn back to the community.
So it's just really nice to come down and see all these different people that are doing all these different things, and you can learn from them because everybody's very friendly. And if you say, "Oh, how do you do that?" everybody's always willing to help.
Stop, stop, stop.